I'd like to call this council and committee meeting to order. I want to acknowledge that the land upon which we are gathered is the traditional territory of the Adirondack, the Haudenosaunee, and the Anishinaabe people. We are the beneficiaries of ancient agreements, such as the dish with one spoon between the Anishinaabe and the Haudenosaunee, who agreed to share the abundance of the land through peace, friendship, and mutual respect. The two-row wampum, by which the Haudenosaunee welcomed the settlers and agreed to share the land in mutual respect. And the Treaty of Niagara, considered a fundamental document by First Nations in all future relations and treaties with the British. We recognize that we have a responsibility to be stewards of the land in cooperation and collaboration with the Indigenous people, not only for one generation, but for all generations to come. We understand that we have an obligation to learn the lessons of our history, educate ourselves about the experiences of the Indigenous people, and seek opportunities to heal the wounds that will result in reconciliation with our Indigenous sisters and brothers. Many First Nations, Métis, and Innu people live and work in Fort Erie. We stand with all Indigenous people, past and present, in promoting the wise stewardship of the lands on which we live. We have the good fortune to live in a land of such abundance, diversity, and beauty. Let us be vigilant in protecting Turtle Island. Mr. Clerk, the roll call, please.
Your Worship, Councillor Noyes sends her regrets. All other members of council are present. Thank you.
There's an addendum to tonight's council agenda. The first is the attachment of the report PDS 61-2024, which was originally put on our agenda without the report. We have presentations from Devin Morton, who's the Supervisor of Development Approvals with respect to 576 Ridge Road North. And we have now the report PDS 62-2024 with respect to 576 Ridge Road North attached to our agenda. We also have the addition of a delegation from David McPherson regarding short-term rental amendments. And we have an Appendix 1 revised and now attached to report LLS 04-2024, which deals with short-term rental licensing. Just a couple of announcements. The first is that Thanksgiving is coming up this weekend, and I want to wish everyone in Fort Erie on behalf of council a happy, healthy, and I guess good weather weekend. And I would point out the second announcement is that in Crystal Beach, there will be the Fall Fest in the Grove. That takes place Saturday, Sunday, and Monday. Saturday, the highlight for many people, including our CAO, will be the Crystal Beach 5K. And I know that they've got well over 250 runners and some walkers included in that. There will be other activities, including a charity bake and barbecue sale. Also, I should get this printing smaller. Looks like a Feverish Lemons, whatever the heck that might be, and the Blackstones. That's because that's a concert. They're bands. Okay, that's something that one would attempt to eat. And then on Sunday, from 9 until 2 p.m. there will be the farmers market, and there'll be food trucks on duty, and there will also be Blake Holiday. That's a group playing, I presume. And then Sunday there will be food trucks again and some more music from X Prime. So, are there any declarations of pecuniary interest? There are none. There are no notices of upcoming public meetings or open houses. There is a public meeting this evening. It's the proposed zoning bylaw amendment for 1024 Arthur Street. This is a process under the Planning Act, and council will receive comments from one of our staff members. I understand it's going to be, is it Devin Morton that's going to be providing that? And after he's provided his comments relative to the application, members of council are free to ask questions. Thereafter, I will ask the proponent for the application if they wish to address council. Once that's been done, again, subject to questions by council, I will ask if there's anyone other than the proponent who wishes to speak in favor of the application. Thereafter, I'll ask if there's anyone who wishes to speak in opposition. On each of those, I will go to Cole Patton, who is manning the digital waiting room, because this is a hybrid meeting, and ask if there's anyone that wishes to address council there. Following that, I will ask the clerk if there is anyone who has sent in late comments that haven't been part of our agenda or our email chain. He will provide us with that, and then the meeting will be closed and we'll proceed to hear or to consider report PDS 61 2024. So at this point, I will ask Devin Walker to provide us with some background information. Sorry, Devin Morton. Good evening.
Good evening. Okay, good evening, Mayor, Council, staff, and members of the public in attendance. My name is Devin Morton. I am the Supervisor of Development Approvals with the Town of Fort Erie. The purpose of this presentation and public meeting is to provide information to Council for a proposed zoning bylaw amendment for the subject lands municipally known as 1023 Arthur Street in Fort Erie. The application was submitted by Urban and Environmental Management, Inc., care of Janet Paul, on behalf of the owner, Beth Henningham. The subject lands are proposed to be rezoned from neighborhood development and environmental conservation overlay to a site-specific residential multiple 2 RM2 zone to permit the construction of a 6-story purpose-built rental apartment building with 63 units and 3 street townhouse dwelling units. Notice of today's public meeting was provided in accordance with the Planning Act by placing a sign on the subject lands and circulating a notice of public meeting by regular mail on September 17th, 2024, to all registered property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands. Go to the next slide. So here we have a timeline of the development application process. The proposed zoning bylaw amendment application is subject to a 90-day processing and review timeline that begins the day the application is deemed complete and will stop the day that council makes a decision. Right now, we are at the public meeting and recommendation report stage and approximately day 60 of the 90-day timeline. So here we have a location map of the subject lands. As you can see, the subject lands are located within the urban boundary and are in the Garrison neighborhood. The subject lands are located on the west side of Arthur Street with 60.96 meters of frontage and a total lot area of 6,146 square meters. The nearest park is Energy Field Park, located along the east side of Barron Drive, approximately 900 meters west of the subject lands. The neighborhood generally consists of detached and semi-detached dwellings. So here we have a view looking north from the subject lands. Here we have a view looking east from the subject lands. Here we have a view looking south from the subject lands. And a view looking west from the subject lands. So the subject lands are currently designated urban residential in the town of Fort Erie's official plan. The proposed multiple dwelling and street townhouses are permitted uses within this designation, and no amendment to the official plan is proposed at this time. The subject lands are currently zoned neighborhood development ND zone in the town zoning bylaw. The applicant seeks to rezone the subject lands to a site-specific residential multiple RM1 zone. And here we have an illustration of the proposed site plan and conceptual elevations, of the apartment building or multiple dwelling. And here we have a conceptual rendering of the proposed street townhouses. So in terms of a public open house, that was held on September 12th, 2024. All property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands were notified of the meeting, and town planning staff and the agent were in attendance. Generally, the concerns expressed at the open house included schools, traffic, and the proposed massing. Thank you very much. This concludes the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you very much, Mr. Morton. Do any members of council have any questions at this point? You put up the elevations. Which of those elevations is the front of the building? It's hard for me to discern that unless it's, well, it's an apartment building, so presumably there's a central lobby of some sort.
There we go. So it should be the east elevation that will be closest to the public right-of-way. It's kind of hard to tell from this because some of the details get lost there.
Okay. If you could clarify that, I'd be interested in knowing that, or I can ask the proponent, I guess. Okay, if there are no other questions of Mr. Morton, thank you very much, sir. So now I'll ask if the agent or the proponent wishes to address council. Good evening.
Good evening, Mayor Redekop, members of council. My name is Greg Terrace. I'm a senior planner with Urban Environmental Management in Niagara Falls. Thank you for the opportunity to address council this evening at this public meeting. We do have a presentation, and I won't repeat what was presented by Mr. Morton to keep things to a minimum here. I'm not sure if the presentation is going to come up. Was it received last week? Thank you.
While we're waiting for that, do you know which of those elevations was the front elevation?
I believe it was the drawing on the bottom part of that.
Where there be some vehicles that would be parked?
Correct,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah. Perhaps while we're waiting, there was just, I would just like to say, we are in support of the information report that was prepared by staff. There were a couple items in there that were referred to that were looking for a holding provision on the zoning bylaw amendment. We would really like to avoid the holding and coming back again. So if I could perhaps just touch on the three things that were identified on the holding. The first was the gas well. So we have confirmed that the gas well that the region identified is not on our property. It is on a property to the north. And we have contacted the Ministry of Northern Development and Mines and have received information that we will provide that gas well has been plugged. We are doing further study to address that, and I would hope we will have that before the zoning bylaw would come back to council so that we might be able to avoid the holding on that issue. The second was the septic tank decommissioning. So that will be decommissioned. I believe it's the region that asked that a holding be put on until the services are connected for the existing house. The proponent who is purchasing this property, one of the conditions of the sale is that they have to hook up to the municipal system, and the existing septic tank is located under where the townhouse will go, so it does have to be removed. So our request would be if that could be a condition of the severance of the property rather than holding on the zoning bylaw. And the third condition of holding was the sanitary capacity, which The proponent has submitted with their application the required fee for third-party modeling, which was submitted and was part of why the application was deemed complete August 15th. So my understanding is usually it's about 3 weeks to do that study. So given that it was deemed complete and submitted on August 15th, we're almost 2 months from that point. We would hope that the results of that study would be available so that we could avoid the holding again on that if there is sufficient capacity. So that was really our main thoughts here, is that if we could avoid the holding on the application.
So it sounds like much of that's going to be taken care of before we get a
Yes.
recommendation report in any event.
And we're working very hard to, Your Worship, to address that before you get the recommendation
Thank you.
report. Yeah.
Mr. Patton, how are we making out? Have you been able to locate the presentation?
Mayor, I'm just speaking with planning staff, and it appears that it might have been sent to a staff member that's no longer with the town, so we're just trying to see if we can recover that. But there's a chance that we might not be able to have it available this evening.
Yeah, I think Mr. Morton covered everything that I'd want to speak to anyway, so there's
Okay.
really no need unless.
I may consider the unusual later on. I may ask you to clarify if there's anything that comes up that you
Absolutely.
may have addressed.
Okay.
Any members of council have any questions of Mr. Terrace? Councillor Christensen?
I was just wondering, I was looking at the square meters and converting to square feet. Is the market, and frankly, some of them appear like the 3-bedroom is about 861 square feet. It seems it's not as bad as some in more urbanized areas, but is that a size that is considered adequate for, family?
For you, Mr. Mayor, is one of the members of the proponents team is a real estate agent, so I am going to rely on the fact that they have done their due diligence in terms of sizes of units for this that would be marketable. And they have different sized units, hoping to attract different types of clientele for the apartment.
Councillor Christensen?
And I guess just following up on going from the larger to the smallest, it's a 400 and change square foot bachelor. Again, there has been a market study done because we know from some of the experiences in the condo market, as well as actually my experience fairly long time ago, but nevertheless, about the attractiveness of bachelor types that are small. I'm just wondering whether this is going to present, on the smaller end, some marketing issues.
Yeah. Again, I wasn't involved in the design of the building, so I can only respond that the designer and the proponent and their background in real estate they took that into consideration in terms of developing the size of the units in this facility. I think that given that, the balance of affordability and things, that a smaller unit like that would tend to be on the side of being more affordable for someone that might be in a position that they're one person in the unit, so, yeah.
Thank you.
Any other members of council? Councillor Dubanow?
Thank you very much, Your Worship, and through you to the presenter, sorry, Mr. Terrace, that's it. There's another individual, same first name, different last name, who works in planning, so I sometimes get confused.
Okay,
so
no
just
problem.
took a second to kick in. Thank you very much for coming here this evening, and certainly, as the mayor said, those points you raised, hopefully we can get addressed by the time the recommendation report comes around. But I just had a couple questions. My first question is, what kind of, assuming that the issues can be sorted out, we don't have to deal with any holding provisions or anything of that nature, what is your proposed timeline for construction? When are you expecting to get shovels in the ground?
Through you, Your Worship, I would think that we're looking next year. We still have to get site plan approval for the apartment, severance consent for the townhouses, That process generally is 6 to 9 months, so I would expect we're into mid to late next year at the earliest for construction.
Thank you. And if I may, Your Worship, thank you for that answer. And the reason I asked is because one of the things that we are looking for in our community is purpose-built rentals. So it's nice to see a proposal, instead of being a condominium building, to actually be a purpose-built rental. So my questions are now related to that and issues of affordability. So do you have any target of and perhaps I'm speaking, going to the level of marketing and stuff, but do you have any idea of what, like the target demographic? Are these intended to be high-end, high-rent units, more modest, affordable? Do you have an idea of what they're planning?
Myself, I don't, but perhaps if there's others asking questions, I can confer with the owners and get back to you on that question. Yeah.
That would be excellent. And if I may, Your Worship, the reason I asked is one of the things that was cited in the information report this evening that we received was that this would be subject to community benefit charges. And so the reason I asked that question is, has there been any discussion about perhaps including a few, designated affordable units in there as part of that community benefit charge, kind of an in and out, to kind of satisfy that requirement? Has that anything you've discussed with the team at all?
Not specifically, no, but
Okay.
again, we can get back to you on that. Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Dubanow, Councillor Flagg.
Thank you, Your Worship, and Mr. Terrence, thank you. Can you tell me if there will be EV charging stations included in your proposal?
I don't know the answer to that. That we haven't really got to the site, like detailed design of the site. So it's something we certainly, I know that most new developments do incorporate that. So I would anticipate that's something would be considered.
Thank you. Just one further then. My concern with the way that the building is built, EV charging stations in the base of that building may not be the most practical given the current state of the EV charging station requirements and not being able to charge them in some of the interior homes and so forth.
Any other members of council? Thank you very much, Mr. Terrace.
Thank you.
Okay, so at this time, I'll ask if there's anyone who wishes to speak in favor of the application other than obviously the proponent or the proponent's agent. Mr. Patton, is there anyone in the digital waiting room? Could you, if that person wishes to address council at this point, they could raise their hand, digital hand. If not, then is there anyone who wishes to speak in opposition or address council with respect to the matter? Please come forward. Good evening, and we need your full name and address for the record.
Sure. My name is Susan Taylor. I'm a resident on Arthur Street at 1022, directly across from the proposed site. Good evening, Mr. Mayor, council members, and staff. Our main concern, I've spoken to a handful of the residents, although there is many new residents in the forgive me, I'm finding the name, the Ashton Homes section of Arthur Street that's been built down the end. Many people down there. There's almost 300 homes, I'm sure you're aware of, that have just been built there. Actually, they're still building. Stage 4 apparently is on the move at the moment. So there, at the end of all of that, there's going to be about 300 new homes already down at the end of Arthur Street. So that we have been dealing with as residents of most of us over 20 years has been noisy, dirty. There's been times that we couldn't even leave. Myself, I had to call into work because I couldn't leave my property because of the caverns in the middle of the street. All of that will have to be basically dug up again just to start this process. which I don't think any of us are naive enough to say that building isn't needed. The tax revenue, new housing and everything else is definitely what keeps us moving forward. I think most of us are just concerned about the height. 6 stories in a century-old neighborhood, it just doesn't fit the aesthetics. The townhouses and single-dwelling homes, not a problem. I mean, that's what we're all in, and that's why we bought in that area. It's nice, quiet, little quaint, close to the amenities. Speaking of the amenities, we are currently in infrastructure issues. We don't have, as many as you know, yourself, Mr. Mayor, was at the summit. The hospital situation is very concerning about all the new growth. We have another 300 home unit going in up further on Garrison that is being built by Alliston Woods, I believe, is the builder, but there's 300 units going in there as well, which there's an awful lot of influx of people, residents, needing healthcare, doctors, schools, which are currently, the high school is very overcrowded with 7 portables outside. So the main concerns are just the infrastructure, the crowding, going in and out of Arthur Street myself has been taking sometimes up to 5 minutes just to get off the street. Left turns coming off of Garrison onto Arthur Street, very dangerous because there's the center lane is not a center lane at that spot. It is a turning lane to go the other way, and many cars expect you to sit in the middle of the lane to turn left. I've been honked at, cut off within inches. People get mad and cut off, given the finger, of course. And the anger in that situation is just not fair. We just want to get home, get in and out safely. People cutting off, it's dangerous. So I guess all in all, it's just the infrastructure, crowding, but most of all the height. It's, if we could bring it down to a reasonable level for something that would fit in a century-old neighborhood, we'd appreciate it. Thank you for your time.
Don't go away. Thank you very much for your
sorry.
comments. And some of the concerns that you've expressed have been concerns that have been expressed here for other development projects throughout the town. Are there any members of council that have any questions of Ms. Taylor? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to address council or speak in opposition to the application? Mr. Patton is the person in the digital waiting room moving at all, putting up a hand?
Not saying anything's written.
Okay. Once more, is there anyone else who wishes to address council with respect to this matter? If not, clerk, have we received any late correspondence that wasn't part of the report on this matter?
Your worship, no additional comments were received.
Okay, then I'm going to declare this public meeting closed, and we're going to move to report PDS 61, 2024. Can I have a mover for that report, Councillor Dubanow? That report's on the floor for questions or comments. Councillor Dubanow.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just a few quick comments. Mr. Terrace was able to answer the bulk of the questions that I had with regard to the affordability and the timeline for construction. Going into a more philosophical vein with some of the challenges that and this isn't the first time, we've had other situations like this in the past where, we're right at the periphery of a commercial district and interfacing with neighborhoods, and it becomes a challenge that we have to weigh here at council, because one of the major issues that we need in this community, and it's been identified, are purpose-built rentals. And, so many times we're seeing, condos or proposals for condominium buildings. We really have a gap in that market. So to have a proposal come forward with in my opinion, a very, I don't want to call it ambitious, but it's an aggressive timeline for construction. It would meet that need. I understand the residents' concern about height. I get it. This is a challenge we're seeing all across our community, these interfaces. And, you know, it's the, almost a pick your poison kind of situation, because we know that we have this concern, and we know that we need purpose-built rentals. We know where this site is located. It's close to Garrison Road. You can, you know, you stand there from the road, you can almost see the edge of the Sobeys Plaza there. So it's the kind of building that would promote, you know, the walkability. You know, you can get a cart and, you know, get over to the traffic lights just in front of Uncle Sam's there, get across the street, do your grocery shopping, and not even necessarily need to have a car. So, you know, I'm in a tough spot here because I'm the Ward 2 councillor. I have a resident here who you know, has this concern. It's a concern I understand, but at the same time, if we can't build a building like this here, I don't know where else in our community we could, because we're right within eye shot of Garrison Road, and you know, I understand the concern about the road. I agree that the region probably, and Councillor Flagg was, you know, just back and forth here speaking briefly about it. That turn there is horrible. I hope it's something we can address in the recommendation report coming up. It could just be a matter of the region needing to repaint and redesignate and move that around. But, you know, I ran into this similar situation when we had the proposed 6-story apartment building behind where Starbucks and A&W was. You know, it's really tough when we have these interfacing issues where the neighborhoods go right onto a commercial district. But at the same time, that is our most busiest commercial corridor in the community. It is eye shot of it. I think it's a great project. I don't know how we can reduce the height and maintain the ability to have those rental units. Perhaps that's something staff can come up with in a recommendation report. Maybe we can do something creative. But, you know, this is a need in our community, and we don't have a lot of these proposals come forward. And when they do, I like to see them move forward and find a way to make this work. Purpose-built rentals in this day and age, there are tax implications that made them very difficult to build before, which the federal government has helped to address. There's affordability issues of the servicing and then continuing with interior components that always make condominiums more favorable. So when we have a purpose-built rental building come forward, it's not something we see very often. So I'm hoping we can make something work here, and I'm hoping that maybe we can have more discussion with the proponent, maybe to find some affordable units and use our community benefit charges there. So those are just my comments. This is, you know, we get it here at council, but it's the competing interests of where it is. So that's just what I wanted to say, and I appreciate the opportunity. Thank you, Your Worship.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Dubanow. Any other members of council? Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a quick comment on the intersection at Garrison Road. I was looking at it on Google Earth while we were sitting here, and I think we absolutely need to see what more can be done there. And I think Councillor Dubanow makes another good point about what other creative opportunities are there with the property and the number of units, and maybe staff can look at those too in the discussions leading forward. Thank you.
Anyone else? Ms. Dawaria, so in terms of some of the issues that have been raised this evening, with respect to the access to and from Garrison Road, that's something that your staff can take up with the region? I mean, they've been circulated on this, so they should know that it's an issue. So perhaps there can be some collaboration on a solution there. Second of all, Mr. Walsh, we do have traffic calming policies, and so if there's an issue with respect to Arthur Street as traffic accumulates, that's something that the residents have access to?
Absolutely. It's through the application process, and we'll take a look at it if one comes in.
Thank you. And then thirdly, back to you, Ms. Dawaria, the issue of community benefits because of the height of the building has been raised, and I presume that your staff can have further dialogue with the proponent and the proponent's agent about the possibility of utilizing some of that community benefit for some type of affordable units in a 63-unit building.
Yes, Your Worship. So we would be bringing back a recommendation report that would outline that this property would be subject to a community benefit, and then that would be council's decision how they would like to allocate those funds.
So You've heard from one councillor, now you're hearing from the mayor, that we would like your staff to look at whether there's some opportunities for some affordable housing, and whether that's an in and an out with respect to a community benefit. If you could follow up on it, we'd appreciate it. Thanks very much. So if there are no other questions or comments, then I'm going to call the question with respect to the information report. All those in favor? None opposed, that is carried. Okay, so that report has been dealt with. We're now going to go to planning and development services. Did I hear during the pre-meeting discussions that Councillor Dubanow, you're going to chair planning? Okay. You are the chair, so you can share it.
Yes, yes. Your
Over to
Worship.
you.
We did have some discussion, but we settled on this.
Perfect.
So, Planning and Development Services Subcommittee meeting is now in session. We have 3 presentations or delegations this evening. The first is by Stephen Weaver, President, and Patrick Casey, Planner, GSP Group, regarding Parks and Open Space Master Plan Report PDS 64, 2024. Mr. Weaver, Mr. Casey, if you can.
Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming in your time here today. My name is Elizabeth. I am the Parks Planner for the town of Fort Erie, and I have the honor of managing the Parks and Open Space Master Plan. This is a priority to Council and is one of the pillars of their strategic plan. Currently, we are in the draft stage, and the intent here today is to present the draft Parks and Open Space Master Plan so we can receive comments from staff, Council, and the public to form the final report. I am happy to present and introduce Steve Weaver and Patrick Casey from GSP, the consultants that are working with the town to create the Parks and Open Space Master Plan.
Thank you.
Thank you, Elizabeth, and good evening, Chair Christensen and members of the committee. I'm honored to be with you tonight to provide you with an overview of the draft 2024 Parks and Open Space Master Plan.
Excuse me, I just wanted to mention you can raise the podium if you need to, if it makes you more comfortable.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Great.
Okay.
Hopefully you can hear me better, too.
That was the thought.
Okay. So Patrick is standing behind me to my left, and he will be providing much of the presentation. A copy of the plan itself is available on Let's Talk for Erie and has been released for public input. And it's exciting to get this to this stage of this project where we've spent a lot of time gathering feedback and input from the community, stakeholders, potential partners, and a range of audiences to get existing conditions and understanding what's working well, some ideas and priorities for the future. And what we've done is taken all of that information and assembled this draft master plan with a series of draft recommendations for feedback. By no means is the plan final, and we intentionally left out certain details, most specifically related to capital costs tied to those recommendations at this stage. Again, we're at the point where we want to get feedback on did we hit the mark on what the community is looking for, what the community needs, what council was expecting to see from this document. And once we have feedback on that, we will be back to council with further details and implementation ideas, and specifically with capital costs outlined for the plan. So we do have a number of slides here to provide to you. And if you could go to the next, I can do that myself. There we go. Just a quick outline on what we would like to cover, and we'll move through this fairly quickly. It is a very comprehensive document, and so we're not going to spend a lot of time on every topic area, but maybe at the end of the presentation, if there's any component to this that you would like us to focus on or come back to, or if there are any questions, we can certainly scroll back to a specific slide. So just a bit of an introduction on some of the foundations of the plan. So you'll see as you read through the plan, it moves from general high-level direction and overall strategic pillars by the time you get to the end of the plan, you're into very specific details. And then there's a range of different directions in between. Patrick will speak a little bit about some of the background that informed the plan. So you did have a previous Parks and Open Space Master Plan from 18 years ago in 2006. A lot has changed since then, and the purpose of this plan is, of course, to update and renew that plan. Patrick will cover a little bit about the community consultation, which I've already mentioned, and what we heard there. A little bit about existing provision levels, an overview of some changes that are recommended to the park classification system and standards. And that component does build on some of your other work, your official plan, your waterfront master plan, which as you've grown has become more sophisticated, more granular, and so we're following that kind of policy direction. As Patrick gets towards the end of the presentation, he'll cover some information about the projected needs. So again, this is based on the forecast growth to the year 2031 and beyond, as well as what we're hearing from the community and what we've observed with respect to your existing parks and outdoor recreation facilities. I've already mentioned that in terms of the financial information, we're not including all of the capital cost estimates and related operating implications at this stage. That will be further updated once we've had some verification of the overall recommendations. I do want to emphasize as well that it is a long-term plan. So while it's ambitious, there's a lot of projects and recommendations identified. Those will have costs to them. It's not that that will need to be done or is expected to be done overnight. That will take many years to accomplish. The way these master plans work, and I'm sure as you've experienced with your 2006 plan, is that it's aspirational. It sets out what we've heard from the community, what it would likely be take to implement those ideas and priorities over the next 10, 15, 20 years, what the order of magnitude costs would be, and then some strategies about how you might be able to pay for some of that. By no means do the tools available to you cover all of the needs that arise. So you have development charges, parkland dedication, cash in lieu of parkland, community benefits charges. There's a number of tools in the toolbox. Our experience has been that those generally don't fund 100% of the need that arises from growth, and those are very growth-related funding tools. There's also your existing parks. There's replacing aging infrastructure. There's the asset management and life cycle nature of those. There's improvements that are needed as you grow. This requires some creative thought, some annual decision-making that can be tough at budget time, and sometimes things get pushed further into the future because there simply isn't enough money. Sometimes they're dependent on grant applications. Sometimes there are partnerships that can overcome the financial hurdle to implement some of these ideas. But as I say, this is an overall long-term plan. Don't panic if the costs look high when we get to that point. It will need to roll out over many years, and adopting the plan doesn't mean you're committing to spending all that money. It's a year-by-year annual review through your budget process. You have recently updated your development charges and community benefits charges. Your first CBC study was completed last year, and we have looked at those materials as well to get an understanding of your financial frameworks and how growth-related funding sources can help contribute to providing a revenue stream for these recommendations. So with that, I will pass it over to Patrick, and I'm happy to come back if there are questions at the end of the presentation.
Right. Oh, okay, that's it. We found the upper limit. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of council. So as Steve mentioned, the purpose of the Parks and Open Space Master Plan is to provide a framework for making sustainable decisions about the town of Fort Erie's parks and open spaces. As Steve mentioned, and it's worth emphasizing, it does not prescribe decisions, it recommends decisions and the framework for making them. In terms of scope, the master plan encompasses outdoor spaces, outdoor recreational facilities, and trails that are owned, operated, and maintained by the town. The plan makes a number of recommendations which have been summarized in the staff report that's before you this evening. They're also summarized in section 7 of that draft master plan. In terms of a very high-level summary, the recommendations cover classification systems for park and open spaces, incorporating those into the town's asset management, addressing the anticipated future need, prioritizing renewals, repairs, and renovations, and cultivating partnerships. As we're all keenly aware, I'm sure parks and open spaces are a vital component of the quality, not just of the physical life of the community, but culturally, socially, and spiritually as well. They support physical and mental health, and given their important role in the community, it's important that parks be considered as part of a larger growth management strategy. These spaces contribute to the community's resilience, by providing green space and by providing places for people to recharge and revitalize. And they also make the town a more attractive place, as well as enhancing tourism opportunities. The slide before you these are the principles from the 2006 Parks and Open Space Master Plan. I won't run through all of them. You can see them up there, and a bit more detail is provided about these in the introduction to the draft master plan. It is worth pointing out that a number of these remain relevant to this day, and this 2006 master plan has provided a fairly solid foundation for the new master plan to build upon as we move forward. The emerging trends, I can come back to these if you like. These are addressed in section 1.5 of the draft master plan, which describes them in detail. The one item I would like to highlight is the fourth bullet point there, the approaches to funding and asset management. The trend in this aspect has seen the need for balancing new spaces with the renovation and renewal of existing spaces, which is a very important component in terms of not just the environmental, but also financial sustainability of the system and the management of the park system. There's been a growing emphasis on approaches that consider the entire life cycle of these parks and open space assets, which, as everybody faces resource crunches, is an important component. So there was an extensive community consultation process that went into preparing the Parks and Open Space Master Plan. There were in fact 2 rounds of consultation, one during the very initial phase of the project in 2017 and 2018, which somehow was both 6 years ago and last week. No, okay. No more jokes. Right. So during that initial phase, and also early in 2024, both phases of community consultation involved public open houses, which gave us a chance to speak with and listen, and more importantly, listen to members of the community, as well as online surveys. We also conducted meetings with various community groups, recreation organizations, and other stakeholders. The entire goal of this process being to provide us with an idea of the community's priorities, expectations, and needs, and to develop the vision and principles that would guide us in preparing the actual master plan. So it's worth pointing out that there were a number of similarities in what we heard over both periods of community consultation, which are on the slide up here. Some of the main points of emphasis are that residents townwide want to have access to parks and recreation opportunities no matter where they live. Items like maintenance, cleanliness, general upkeep and repair were high priority items. A number of community members emphasized the need for features like benches, shaded areas, especially along trails to make them more accessible, to make them more age-friendly and universally usable. The protection and preservation of natural areas, especially in the face of development pressures, was a very high priority item for the community, as was maintaining public access to trails, nature, and the waterfront. The trail system is a very popular feature among the community. As a sum up for what we heard for the community consultation, these four sort of guiding principles provided the vision for the town's park and open space system. The town and its residents are looking for well-designed, well-cared for, and well-kept places that provide them with points of community pride, safe, friendly, and inclusive spaces that are accessible for everyone, offer equitable and affordable opportunities for all members of the community, support the preservation of natural features, provide connections with nature, provide connections with each other, through a safe, convenient, and well-maintained system of trails. And now there are some numbers, which is always everybody's favorite part. So the existing stock of parks and open spaces is just over 146 hectares for a 2021 population of about 33,840 people in the town. This works out to an average of 4.32 hectares per 1,000 people. The town's current official plan sets a bar at 4 hectares, so it's above that, healthy provision rate. The last point there, the fact that provision rates do vary from point to point across the town is probably the largest challenge moving forward, making sure that these spaces are equitably provided. Some pictures. I won't spend too much time. These are also from the report. The light shading you can see there represents the 4.32 hectares on average. And the point of this, which is based on just the locations of existing parks, is to show, depending on where in the town people live, how much access to parkland is there. And you can see it varies from place to place. In terms of some in-park features, a lot of numbers on this particular slide. The gist of this is that based on current satisfaction levels, provision is at a fairly healthy level. We did hear there is sort of an emphasis on people wanting to see more spray pads in particular. I know that recently the town has invested in providing more outdoor racket courts as well, which has been welcomed by the community. In terms of recommendations for classifying parks and open spaces, the master plan establishes sort of 4 large categories. Town parks and open spaces, which are your traditional parks. If somebody says a park, it's what you think of, a green space with trees and activity areas, providing those amenities for residents. Waterfront parks and open spaces, heritage parks and open spaces, which emphasize either natural heritage or the town's rich cultural heritage. And then linear parks and open spaces, which as a name is chosen basically to keep the parks and open spaces part of that name, which are your trails. They provide connections between different destinations. Each of those 4 categories we've broken down into sort of subcategories just to help manage these spaces. Under town parks and open spaces, we have destination parks, which are your largest, highest profile amenity spaces, serve the entire population and people who live beyond the town. Community parks are sort of a medium profile, providing outdoor space for an entire urban area. And then neighborhood parks and village greens are smaller spaces that cater to the outdoor needs of the more immediate population in the area. The categories for waterfront parks and open spaces are all from the town's waterfront strategy. One of the items in the scope of this master plan was to incorporate that classification system into the updated one. Doing it in this way to recognize these as important outdoor assets for the town and part of the park and open space system, but as a distinct entity from the parks and open space, the green parks that we normally think of. I mentioned heritage parks cover natural heritage. Shagbark Nature Park is a very popular space among residents. And then we did hear there is sort of a desire to know more, to have more of an emphasis on the town's history and heritage in its parks and open space system, which is where the cultural spaces category comes in. And then finally, linear parks and open spaces, regional trails are things like the Friendship Trail that provide sort of major active transportation connections within the town and with neighboring municipalities. Community trails are sort of secondary connective features that connect those regional trails with neighborhoods. Nature trails are generally low maintenance facilities in existing parks, and then open space linkages are meant to be sort of naturalized corridors for the movement of wildlife. This figure is also taken from the Parks and Open Space Plan, Master Plan. There we are. The idea is that the different categories of park and open space have been divided into sort of 3 levels based on intended service. At the town-wide level, you have the destination parks, the anchor waterfront parks, which the classification from the waterfront strategy recommends being sort of the anchor of the system, good name. And then the nature parks and cultural spaces round out that particular category. We also have community level parks and neighborhood level parks, again, based on the intended sort of service radius. And then I've already mentioned the trail classifications. In the interest of time, I can come back to this if anybody really wants to hear me talk more. But these you can find this information in the draft master plan. There's also recommended provision rates for various in-park facilities based heavily on existing provision rates for playgrounds, spray pads, various soccer fields, junior, intermediate, and senior, baseball diamonds, outdoor racket courts, and basketball and other outdoor multi-use courts. The recommendations for in-park facilities in different classes go into various categories. I'm going to skip through the next few slides because it's not absolutely imperative to understanding. But again, I can come back to this if there are any questions. And again, there's lots of detail on this, about this in the master plan. The idea being that there are different features recommended for different park classes. Your higher profile parks should have higher profile in-park features as sort of the Coles Notes version of that. Here's the similar for waterfront parks, heritage parks. And then I mentioned service areas. So these are the locations and approximate service areas of existing community parks in the town, based on an approximate 1,600 meter radius. And then recommendation number 16, which talks about potential locations for future community parks, was the result of a gap analysis that looked at the number of people living outside of any service area, and based on where the majority of those people live, these were the locations for possible future community parks that are recommended. From the information that was made available to us about the capital budget, I think a number of these locations are already accounted for in the town's plans. Some of these are I'm sure you're already aware of there being need. We did a similar analysis for existing neighborhood parks and village greens, which are, again, even smaller spaces. Similar gap analysis. Again, there's some overlap in terms of the community and neighborhood parks. And again, a number of these locations, based on the information that's available to us, do seem to be accounted for in existing capital budgeting. So that's good. And then in terms of recommendations, using population and demographic projections to meet those provision targets, Here are the recommendations for additional facilities, either in existing parks or potentially in new parks to 2031. Again, what we anticipate will be needed to meet those service targets over the next 7 years. So two playgrounds, one junior, two senior. If you're combining junior and senior as one playground, you can read. I'm almost there, I promise. The projected parkland needs on the next slide are based on, I just want to focus on the 2031 column here as the more sort of immediate time frame. The projections that we used in the master plan are based on those from Niagara Region and their recent official plan update, projections for their local municipalities. For population growth from 2021 to 2031, the anticipated need for additional parkland falls just short of 30 hectares, and that's to maintain a provision standard between 4 and 5 hectares per 1,000 people. Again, based on the information that's been available to us, it would appear that a lot of this has already been accounted for in the capital budget. These 30 hectares, the idea would be the primary means for acquisition to be either through parkland dedication or through the use of cash in lieu funds, which brings me to the overall strategy for dedication and cash in lieu funds. This also comes from the later sections of the master plan, the idea being based on areas that are well serviced, areas that need maybe a bit more service, whether to prioritize the actual dedication of land or to prioritize the collection of cash in lieu. As a general strategy, if opportunity arises to acquire land for a park that will have sort of a town-wide draw, then acquire that land if possible. Development without a residential component, prioritize cash in lieu. Then you can see in the 3 urban areas, Fort Erie, Crystal Beach, and Ridgeway Thunder Bay, those identified areas of need that were shown on those map slides. Look at the dedication of parkland in those areas, or if there's an opportunity to acquire land on the waterfront. And then for Stevensville, prioritize the collection of cash in lieu. For Douglastown, also prioritize that collection unless the opportunity to address an existing area of need arises, or again, to acquire land on the waterfront. So the slide everybody has been waiting for, conclusion. This new master plan builds on, like I said, a solid foundation provided by the previous one and the successes of the town's 2006 master plan. The recommended classification system brings together a number of documents, including the waterfront strategy, to provide a system that's meant to work with the rich diversity of spaces that the town of Fort Erie offers. It's recommended that the town find ways to maintain the current provision rate of 4.32, so between 4 and 5 hectares per 1,000 residents. Similarly, look to maintain current provision rates for recreation facilities, and the report contains recommendations for how to do that. And then continue to pursue opportunities to address identified areas of need, which, again, from available information, it seems has been proactively done already. So I thank you very much for your time.
Thank you, Mr. Casey. Just quick comment, I was very happy to see on behalf of the women and children in town, the comment about additional washrooms. Public. Are there comments, questions by any members of council? Your worship.
Let me thank you gentlemen for putting together this report. I had a chance to read most of it and had, let me say, mixed impressions about various parts of it. I was interested in a couple of things in particular from a high level. One was the methodology that you utilized in order to determine what kind of parks we needed and where. And the other thing that I was interested in knowing is what were the premises upon which a report with these types of recommendations would be? For example, are you familiar with the revenues that the municipality generates through a general levy?
Through the chair to your worship. We are familiar with your current financial, allocations to Parks and Recreation, capital and operating. We haven't documented that in the plan right now, but basically we're summarizing all the recommendations, and the intent is to align the cost of those recommendations with a sound financial strategy. The operating implications are discussed because what was loud and clear through this process, consulting with staff, consulting with the community, and what we hear in most communities, is that too often there is a focus on capital investment in parks, and the system gets larger, more land is added, more facilities are added, and the corollary operating resources necessary to maintain that may not be invested on the same ratio. So we are emphasizing the operating implications. We definitely invite any feedback you have in terms of, like, if something seems off in the information you're seeing with respect to what your historical capital and operating investments have been. But on the capital side, although we don't have the numbers in here, the recommendations are very mindful of what's already in your adopted capital forecast from the development charge study in terms of the growth-related park improvements that have been identified, if that helps.
Well, it does help, but it doesn't necessarily align with what I understand to be what we've been investing and what we're capable financially of investing. Having regard to, I know you addressed it briefly in the report, the asset management plan. So we do have an infrastructure gap with respect to our asset management.
Yeah.
That includes parks and facilities as well as water, wastewater, roads, bridges, culverts, the whole gamut. And so when you embark upon this type of exercise with the recommendations, do you have in mind what the municipality's other obligations are with respect to other assets?
So again, through the chair to the mayor, primarily at this stage, we're identifying what the community and the evidence tells us will be needed in the future. So as I said at the beginning, the master plan may not be fully achievable based on known funding sources past. There may be a gap that needs to be filled over the next 10, 15, 20 years. That's pretty common with these plans. And I think your 2006 master plan, I would characterize it that way as well. And now, so there are projects for which there would be clear funding sources available. A new neighborhood park that goes in a new subdivision, there'll be development charges from that subdivision. You'll have development charges that you can allocate to putting the playground in, the pathways, the benches, the shelter, and so forth. A park that is 30 years old, has aged and needs replacement, that's where the gap that you're talking about on asset management comes in. You may rely on a grant from another source. You may rely on a program that helps to raise funds in conjunction with the community. You may rely on local business sponsors and fundraising initiatives. Those are less clear. And because it's such a long-term plan, we can't necessarily nail down how every project is going to be funded precisely. And so there will be some that have ideas around how they may be funded, but the actual funding of them, there's going to need to be a creative, multi-pronged approach to figure that out on an annual budgeting basis.
Thank you, Chair, if I might continue. So when you embarked upon that last series of comments, I smiled. Because I get it. I understand this type of process, what the residents may say they want. And you may use whatever data you utilize to tell us what we need. And I think it really boils down to how much we can afford. And so, hence my questions about our financial general levy, our asset management infrastructure gap, not just for parks, but right across the board. And so my question is there, when you're making these recommendations, because councillors have had a chance to at least get a glimpse of the financial picture here. When you're making these recommendations with, that may be well-intentioned in the sense of this is what the residents are telling you, are you taking into account what the priorities of the municipality may be in order to make these recommendations? Or is this just a 260-page wish list?
It's much more than a wish list, again, through the chair to the mayor. So because certain members of the community say that they would like to see something, that doesn't mean that it's a realistic ask for a community your size. That may not be warranted based on your demographics, your size, a whole bunch of different factors. So it's a multi-layered analysis of need. What does the community tell us that they need through multiple different formats? What is typically provided in a municipality your size? And Patrick pointed to some of the ratios that we've calculated, number of sports fields of different types, per capita, number of courts, acres or hectares of parkland per capita. By no means are we sending you on a foolhardy mission to try and achieve some utopian park system that isn't reasonable or achievable or evidence-based. This is all grounded in good common sense planning that, in our experience doing this for multiple decades in municipalities across Ontario, is grounded into that kind of benchmarking in that realistic world. The thing I want to keep in mind and not close the door on is that in the absence of a master plan that is aspirational, you may not achieve things that you might otherwise achieve, because by having those ideas in the master plan with some costs, it shows other partners and funding programs that you have a plan, you have a vision, and that increases your eligibility for more opportunities than you might not otherwise have. One of the top criteria, for example, in grant programs is question 1, do you have a master plan? And if you have a master plan but doesn't speak to the project for which you're seeking funding, a splash pad as an example, you're not likely to get funding for that. But if you have a master plan that clearly identifies there's a need and a desire and a plan to develop another of that type of facility, that will improve your chances when you pursue grants. But I think it's important for the community to know that identifying a project in a plan like this doesn't guarantee it's going to happen on the timing that's been identified, because unfortunately sometimes the financial realities prevent that from occurring, and that those are the difficult decisions that have to be made year after year through your annual budgeting processes.
If I might, Madam Chair. So in terms of your recommendations with respect to the number of additional facilities that we require, what is is there a data basis for saying that the municipality requires X number of more soccer fields or adult soccer fields? What's the data that supports that, other than the number of residents and the number of fields we already have?
Again, through the chair to the mayor, it is, so we looked at the number of registered participants in soccer, how that's changed over the last number of years, what the soccer organizers are telling us. That is one example, actually, where the messaging at the beginning of the process was different than it was more recently. At the beginning of the process, the program providers were quite satisfied with the number of fields available, and that it could accommodate their needs for as far as they could see. Growth has happened, I think, more quickly than many anticipated, and growth in soccer has been a nationwide phenomenon in Canada for many years now, and it is the fastest growing sport, minor sport in Canada. So we got a different reaction when we engaged the soccer clubs again more recently, where they are now starting to have to put people on lists and turn people who would otherwise like to participate in a program away because of field availability being a constraint. So that kind of information informs how many fields may be needed in the future. We look at overall population ratios as well to the number of fields. And in supplying that need, it's, again, important not to just have a mind, okay, we need to acquire enough land for 3 more fields and bear all that cost. What about lighting an existing field? What about investing in additional artificial turf or increasing the availability with the school board for community use of school fields? You try to find the most cost-effective options to fill the gaps and not just go directly to municipal spending large amounts of money to fill void. And also look at partnership opportunities with the soccer groups themselves. And what we did here is some willingness from some of these organizations to work together towards capital fundraising and grant applications and that sort of thing. So it isn't the municipality does all things at all times for all people. It is a combined joint approach, and this master plan is intended to foster that.
Madam Chair, so you have data with respect to each of these recommendations in terms of actual usage? So you mentioned soccer, you recommended baseball fields, you've talked about pickleball, tennis courts. Didn't say anything about football fields, but maybe that's not something that is played in Fort Erie any longer. Do you have data with respect to all of those for usage?
Yes, so we looked at the scheduling as well. Scheduling can be a bit of a tricky indicator because everybody wants the usage of the fields at the same time. So fields could sit unused for, multiple hours in the day because, the programs can't have participants at certain hours of the day. And particularly, if you have a community where everybody likes to go elsewhere for the weekend, sometimes summer weekends are not as busy. But prime time is generally Friday, Saturday, Sunday through the summers. And some weeknights may seem lower. So it's a combination of what's the prime time demand and what's the overall demand. It's not always a function of this field is 100% booked for the hours that it would be available.
Is that data that you'd be prepared to share with council?
Certainly, we can go back and dig through the analysis that we did on that.
I'd very much appreciate that. When you were doing your calculations about open spaces and what have you, you did, I know at one point in the report, make reference to the Niagara Parks Commission and the Niagara Peninsula Conservation Authority. Are their land holdings in Fort Erie part of your calculations as to the open spaces that we have here?
No, but it's a consideration as well. Like it's a single taxpayer mindset that, you have multiple public open space lands and you have schools and you have other areas that provide access to nature and open space and trails and playgrounds. So don't try to duplicate that. So our recommendations are recognizing that there is other open space available to the community. We're not just looking to fill gaps because there's no municipal town of Fort Erie park in that location. It's a gap in consideration of, is there a school? Is there some other form of public open space there? And I think Patrick has some comments to add to that.
And also, through you, Madam Chair, the sort of the balancing act as well of recognizing the scope of the project and trying not to step on the toes of other organizations. But we're not making recommendations about somebody else's space because that's not part of the plan. So that sort of falls into some of the balancing that has to be done as well.
I understand that, but the reality is that the people that live in the community take advantage of the Parks Commission's property along the Niagara River, or they take advantage of the Conservation Authority's property in Stevensville. They may take advantage of some of the school properties, and you did mention someplace in the report that there should be some dialogue between the school boards and the municipality, perhaps looking at sharing assets. Did you have any discussions with either the main school boards here about what it would take for them to collaborate with the municipality on some of these parks?
Again, through the chair, and that's a great question because under the Ontario Planning Act, it prescribes that in order to require the alternative parkland rate for parkland dedication from development, municipalities required to undertake what's called a parks plan in the Planning Act. And this process has specifically fulfilled that requirement of the Planning Act so that it allows you the most flexibility in your parkland dedication tools. And one of the requirements of the Planning Act in undertaking that parks plan is that the municipality shall consult with the school boards. And so we had good meetings with the District School Board of Niagara to talk about their future plans, their existing school sites, opportunities to expand community access and use of public open space available in the schools. It was great to hear that the high school, for example, across the street is available at some times for community programming and use as well for that sports field. But also things like in future, if there are new schools to be built and new parks to be planned, co-location and finding synergies between locating town-owned and operated parks and facilities with school board-owned and operated facilities. So very much an important part of this process, the consultation with the school boards, and specifically we're fulfilling a legislative requirement around parkland dedication for that.
If I might, Madam Chair, just a couple of more questions. I know that I've taken up a lot of time. I apologize, but this is a major undertaking, and it's something that I think we really need to make sure. You know, your observation about it's out there so the public can comment. My concern is that it's out there, and the more it's out there, the more likely people are going to expect that this is what's going to happen. And so that's, I think, something that we need to be a little bit concerned about. There is recommendations 15 and 16 deal with something that I found a little confusing, and that has to do with Douglas Town and whether they need a park, and if so, where that park should be located. Mr. Casey, when you were commenting, you indicated that there isn't a need for another park in Douglas Town. What we call Douglas Town, we call Douglas Town the area that is to the east of the QEW over to the river. And so we have two large parks, AC Douglas Park, not to be confused with Douglas Park, which is across from the hospital, which is called the Douglas Memorial Hospital. But we also have a small park that's going to be going in Signature Development Phase 2, which is the northeast corner of that property, that Douglas Town. You make recommendation 15 that there should be another park in Douglas Town, but I think you've identified it as on the opposite side of the QEW, in an area where the Black Creek Leisure Homes is located. So can you clarify that for me?
Yeah, so to clarify, we were sort of treating, based on the urban area boundaries, I guess you would call it Douglas Town hyphen Black Creek would be probably the more accurate term for the entire urban area up there. I do want to clarify, though, I have the recommendations. Number 15, you're right, it does speak to a community park in that area, but it does emphasize, in the medium to long term, identify and pursue the acquisition of a location that can serve as a future community park, preferably in the south end of the urban area and with a target size range of 3 to 4 hectares to accommodate future growth. So it's not a directive to go out, as Steve was saying, to do it overnight. It was to say, based on sort of the trends that we see and anticipating future growth, this is likely going to become an area of need in the medium to long term. So the town should be prepared to, at some point in the medium to long term, address that particular need.
Okay, because I think that the potential for growth there in the near future is pretty remote. Part of it has to do with servicing limitations. Anyways, I've got a number of others, but you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to maybe pass them on to you through our Director of Planning, so that she can at least get that over to you, and she'll know what I'm thinking as well. Thank you very much. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you,
Thank you.
Mr. Casey, Mr. Weaver.
Thank you very much.
Our second, and thank you. Did you have any comments, Elizabeth, at all? Or you? I was just asking if you had any further, if you would just wanted to conclude or anything. Oh.
If council has any further questions, then they can email the director, and then I can respond in a memo.
Thank you very much. Our second presentation this evening is by Aaron Hare, Project Manager Policy with respect to the Provincial Planning Statement, the 2024 update. And this is going to be discussed later at Report PDS 65-2024. Mr. Hare.
Thank you. Good evening, Your Worship and Council. I'm Aaron Hare, and Project Manager in Policy in the Community Planning Services Department. And tonight we're here to present the approved updated provincial policy statement, provincial planning statement. I may make that mistake a few times. They did change it from policy to planning statement, which comes into effect on October 20th, so later this month. On April 22nd, staff presented the draft provincial planning statement and Bill 185 to council. And tonight we are focusing on the changes since the draft was recently approved. So yeah, some of the changes with regards to growth targets is the growth plan will be also repealed when the new PPS comes into effect on the 20th, and the current growth plan requires municipalities to plan until the year 2051. The new PPS, the 2020 PPS requires sufficient land shall be made available to accommodate an appropriate range of and mix of land uses to meet the projected needs and time horizons up to 25 years, informed by provincial guidelines. These days, or I guess once the new provincial planning statement is in effect, we can do a minimum of 20 years into a maximum of 30 years for planning horizon. Infrastructure can actually now be looked at a larger extent, as well as we are no longer to do municipal comprehensive reviews. We are to use the population projections that the Ministry of Finance is going to be putting out. As I just mentioned, municipal comprehensive reviews do not get carried over into the new PPS. Yes. So with that, settlement area expansions. So without the need for a municipal comprehensive review, settlement area expansions, essentially municipalities may expand their settlement areas at any time without going through a municipal comprehensive review. Private landowners also have the ability to apply to have their settlement area or their lands added into the settlement area at any time now as well. As well as settlement area requests are now appealable to the Ontario Land Tribunal. Therefore, if a municipality does not support a request for an urban boundary expansion, it must be prepared to defend it at the appeal board. Since the recent changes, we've had 2 requests for formal consultation, and we have another 4 inquiries that are on the books. So it's going to be taking up a lot of staff's time, or we believe it will. As well as we do want to let council know that as part of the 2024 fee schedule, when we were looking at privately initiated secondary plans and some of the proposed policies that were coming forward, we did add a fee at the planning or in the fee schedule at that time for urban boundary expansion official plan amendment. So this is the new criteria within the PPS that an individual would have to satisfy in order to get an urban boundary expansion. Through the official plan project, which we are currently working on, we are going to look at sort of refining or sort of clarifying what it means in the 40-year context to satisfy each of these conditions for land needs. Is it simply that they use our housing needs study to justify it, or do they actually have to hire a land economist to provide proper justification? So through the official plan, we will be vetting that and be providing a little bit more guidance behind that. So as part of the PPS or in growth plan, strategic growth areas that were, under the new PPS, municipalities are required to designate strategic growth areas in their official plan going forward. So this is something that the town is already undertaking as part of the official plan. And what we're doing is we're looking at all of the existing secondary plans that we have, because most of them do have intensification policies, and we're bringing those forward through strategic growth areas. So more information about those will be coming forward when we bring the official plan forward. The town does not have any major transit station areas, so we'll just skip over that. But a new term has been added to the PPS called frequent transit, which means a public transit service that runs at least 15 minutes in both directions throughout the day and into the evening, every day. The PPS will require planning authorities to plan for intensification on lands that are adjacent to the existing and plan frequent transit corridors. Again, at this time, the town does not have any frequent transit, but with the recent request to have a fixed bus route here in town, this is something that planning is looking at. and we'll be looking at it, trying to address as part of the official plan. Intensification. Specific intensification targets under the growth plan have been replaced with just general policy that supports intensification. This allows municipalities to consider targets that meet their local context instead of having 50% of all our growth be through intensification. The previous PPS stated the importance of the official plan, the importance of the official plan being the tool to implement the PPS. The new PPS also highlights the importance of keeping zoning bylaws up to date as well to help implement provincial policy. So, a bit of good news if you're living in the agricultural area. You can now apply to have 2 additional dwellings on agricultural land, subject to it meeting criteria under the Planning Act. This does not mean that they can sever those dwellings off, though. They must be part of the parent parcel. Employment land conversions. The 2020 provincial policy statement required a comprehensive review to convert employment lands to non-employment lands, and a new provincial planning statement removes this requirement, or removes the requirement of that comprehensive review. So it does make it a little bit easier for employment lands to be converted into non-employment lands. The new PPS also adds protections to employment lands. So historically, it was employment lands cannot encroach onto residential or sensitive land uses. There's also reciprocal policies now in the planning or provincial planning statement that protects employment lands from being encroached on by sensitive land uses. This is really meant to help those businesses able to grow and in the future as the need arises. So some other planning changes. The 2024 PPS encourages municipalities to work with school boards on the design and layout of new schools, as well as the PPS now requires municipalities to gauge post-secondary schools to address student housing, especially off-site campus housing as well. This is something that we are also exploring as part of the official plan update. Oh, I skipped one slide. Right. So, land uses which cause potential aviation safety hazard in relation to airports are now prohibited, where they were previously just discouraged. Although this isn't a change, we do want to just highlight that the natural heritage policies in the official or in the PPS have not changed. Some of the definitions, they've changed the odd word just to make it a little bit more clear, but they have not changed any of the natural and heritage policies. The new PPS now encourages planning authorities to develop and implement proactive strategies for conserving significant built heritage resources and cultural heritage landscapes. Again, this is also something that we are currently undertaking as part of the official plan update. This is my last slide. Again, while we are undertaking the official plan, the new PPS does have a policy statement that says even while municipalities are updating their official plans, once the PPS comes into effect, it trumps everything. That's essentially staff's presentation tonight. If you have any questions, try our best to answer them.
Thank you, Mr. Hare. Councillor Dubanow?
Yeah, Madam Chair, I'm just wondering if we could have a very brief 2-minute recess, if that's okay?
Yes.
Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Hare. Do councillors have any questions of staff? Councillor Flagg.
Thank you, Chair. And thank you for your report, Aaron. You indicated the amount of time and effort that staff will be putting into some of these applications. Is there any charge that we're able to levy for some of this extra work done by staff?
So, yes, we do have a fee of $40,000 in the fee schedule for an urban boundary expansion.
Appreciate that. Thank you.
Your worship?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. So my recollection is that when you go through an official plan review, you have to do certain things such as establish whether you've got enough land for certain purposes within your urban boundary. Is that correct?
That's what the municipal comprehensive review process is.
Right. And my understanding, my recollection is that the region went through quite a lengthy period to identify urban area expansions for employment lands and for residential when they did their official plan, which was approved in November of 2022. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And so we now have a situation where with the new provincial planning statement, anybody who owns property could apply outside the urban boundary, could apply to expand the urban boundary to include their lands.
That is correct, yes.
And nobody else can appeal the decision council makes on that except the property owner.
Based on the changes through Bill 185, that is my understanding.
And aside from the $40,000 fee that we will charge, you put up a page here that showed what some of the requirements are, such as the owner would have to establish that there's a need for additional residential lands if that's what they wanted to expand the urban boundary for.
Yes.
And I don't know if you've got the slide that's available, but I think it also had to be close to existing services.
Yeah, there's planned or services available or planned to be available. So there has to be capacity. They would likely have to hire an agriculturist to do an agricultural impact assessment to determine the impacts on the agricultural area. They'll have to do minimum distance separation formula if there's livestock nearby.
And the last one there, the expanded area, they'd have to provide for or agree to some type of phased development.
That is what the PPS states. How we are looking at addressing that through the official plan update is bringing in a new land classification called urban reserve. It's something that a lot of municipalities across Canada use. Essentially, once you do an urban boundary expansion, unless the area is actually planned, you place it in urban reserve, which is more or less a holding zone. It recognizes that it is in the urban boundary, but it recognizes that there needs to be more planning required before it can be opened up for development.
And I've got a comment that I'll make when we get to your memo, your report. But also, you mentioned that property owners may apply to have their land removed from employment land zoning to something else.
Yes, under the new PPS, there's no longer a comprehensive review to do employment land conversion. It does have to meet a bit of a test under the PPS, but it's a lot less stringent than a full comprehensive review.
Presumably, if I might share, one of the criterion would be that the municipality doesn't need the commercial land.
That is one of the tests. Yes, it cannot essentially put the municipality's land needs for employment lands in jeopardy.
And my recollection is Fort Erie was one of maybe 3 municipalities in Niagara that was provided with large additional employment lands through the region's official plan review.
Yeah, we were provided with the sunset lands.
So one would think that we need employment lands. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Your Worship. Are there any other comments, questions? Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Hare. Our third presentation this evening is by Devin Morton, Supervisor Development Approvals, with respect to the proposed official plan and zoning amendments and draft plan of condominium recommendation report for 576 Ridge Road North, associated with PDF report 62, 2024.
Okay, good evening again, Mayor, Council, staff, and members of the public in attendance. My name is Devin Morton. I am the Supervisor of Development Approvals with the Town of Fort Erie. So the purpose of this presentation is to provide a recommendation to Council for a proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendment and draft plan of condominium application for the subject lands municipally known as 576 Ridge Road North in Fort Erie. The application was submitted by Upper Canada Consultants on behalf of the owner, Bryce Ivanchuk. Subject lands are proposed to be rezoned from the institutional I zone to a site-specific residential 1 RM1 zone to permit the construction of 64 residential dwellings, being 36 single detached dwellings and 28 semi-detached dwellings. So here we have a timeline of the development application process. In accordance with the Planning Act, the proposed official plan and zoning bylaw amendment applications are subject to a 120-day processing and review timeline. The proposed draft plan of condominium is subject to a 90-day processing and review timeline. So a council decision was required by April 12th, 2024 for the OPA and ZBA, and by March 13th for the draft plan of condo. Otherwise, the owner may appeal the application to the OLT. So the applications were submitted prior to July 1st, 2023, and therefore are not subject to the refund policies under Bill 109. And the applications are currently on day 298. So here we have a location map of the subject lands. Subject lands being Block 50 are an interior lot fronting onto Ridge Road North in the Ridgeway Thunder Bay neighborhood. Block 50 has an area of 2.047 hectares and 135.57 meters of frontage on the east side of Ridge Road North. Beaver Creek is approximately 650 meters west of the subject lands, and the Shagbark nature area is approximately 250 meters east of the subject lands. The Ridgeway downtown core is located approximately 400 meters south of the subject lands. And the neighborhood generally consists of single detached, semi-detached, and townhouse dwellings on a mix of small and large lots. So here you can see the portion of the subject lands subject to the zoning bylaw amendment being Block 50 only. The subject lands are zoned institutional I zone in the town's comprehensive zoning bylaw 129/1990. The zoning bylaw amendment proposes to rezone the subject lands to a site-specific residential 1 RM1 zone to permit 64 residential dwellings. The RM1 zone defers to zoning regulations established in sections 12.3 and 13.4 as it relates to single and semi-detached dwellings. As the subject lands will be constructed as a block and to private development standards, planning staff are recommending the inclusion of minimum lot frontage area, side yard, and maximum lot coverage regulations within the site-specific RM1 zone. Here you can see the portion of the subject lands subject to the official plan amendment being Block 50 only. Subject lands are designated medium-density residential within the Ridgeway Thunder Bay secondary plan. The medium-density residential designation supports multiple unit buildings, including townhomes and apartment dwellings, with a density range of 25 to 75 units per hectare. Ridge Road North is designated a collector road and a pedestrian/bicycle route. The official plan amendment before us proposes to establish a site-specific policy area over the entirety of Block 50 that adds single detached dwellings and semi-detached dwellings as permitted uses within the medium-density residential designation. The Ridgeway Thunder Bay secondary plan encourages development that reflects its village character and contributes to a complete community. The application's proposed development of single and semi-detached dwellings a built form commonly found throughout the immediate and surrounding neighborhood. So here we have an illustration of the proposed vacant land condominium. The draft plan of condominium proposes to create a vacant land condo for 36 single detached dwellings and 28 semi-detached dwellings, 3 common element roads, and 16 visitor parking spaces. The proposed private roadway and amenities will be constructed to private development standards, included as a condominium common element, and are therefore the sole responsibility of the condo corporation. And finally, we have an illustration of the proposed site plan. And thank you very much. This concludes the presentation. I'm happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Morton. Questions? I'll go to Councillor Lewis first.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. If you can bring up slide 4, which speaks to the zones, and it shows a map of the area there. I just have a quick question. I know we're dealing with the site-specific zone up on the top, but the green area here with the path going to the other part of the phased-in subdivision, there's another little green path going south. That leads to a property that is not part of the applicant's application or in his ownership, if I understand correctly. And I'm just wondering why that path would be there as opposed to not further north going back into the site-specific RM1 zone with the houses being proposed.
Okay, thank you, Chair. Through you. So this block here that's proposed is actually subject to a holding provision, contingent on the outcome of an EIS, I believe, related to the potential habitat of red-headed woodpecker. I will say the lands subject to this application are strictly Block 50. These were approved through a prior application. And it's hard to see from the details on this screen, but there is a block at the northern kind of limit of this property that provides pedestrian access to the site-specific RM1 zone.
And if I can continue, Madam Chair, that was actually my question, because the colors of green, I don't know if that was intentional or not, but they were different, and I just didn't know what the difference may be. So that one's subject to, and totally understand it now, so much appreciated.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Yeah, thank you. I wonder if we could go back to the conceptual plan. And right in the middle, there's a strip of land, yeah, right there. Do you know what that is?
Thank you, Chair, through you. So essentially that's a part of the vacant land condo that'll be reserved to provide access to these rear yards. So it'll be undeveloped, essentially an undeveloped strip of land that will allow access into these rear yards.
So will it be a laneway or will it just be naturalized?
Naturalized green
Okay.
space.
And then the second question, if I might, Chair, is do we have the ability to impose any type of housing design requirements?
Thank you, Chair, through you. So you'll notice that in the draft plan the draft conditions, there is a condition that speaks to establishing architectural control within this area. So that has been included as a condition.
Okay, because I think the concern is we don't want to have umpteen houses that all look the same, except some of them will be semis and the rest will be, okay. Thank you very much.
Are there any other questions of Mr. Morton? No? Thank you very much. That concludes the presentations for this evening. We'll now move to the planning reports. The first is PDS 62, 2024, Proposed Official Plan and Zoning Bylaw Amendments and Draft Plan of Condominium Recommendation Report for 576 Ridge Road North, Fort Erie, Block 50. Can I get a mover to put worship? Are there any comments or worship?
Yeah, Chair, I just wanted to say that I know that Mr. Morton did this report, and I'm not sure who did the report with respect to Arthur Street Development, but I was speaking to the director earlier today, and I thought both of those reports were very well done, and much of the other reports that we have on our agenda have been very well done. So I wanted to congratulate the director on putting together a team right now that is very articulate in their writing. And I don't know about the rest of their advice, but the writing is excellent. Now, I'm going to support this, and I'm just hoping that we can get some good, varied designs in among these houses when they're built. Thank you.
Are there any other comments? That being said, I will call the question. All in favor? Carried. The next report is PDS 63, my finger is not working, PDS 63 2024, the second quarter Q2 development building planning bylaw statistical report. Can I get a mover? Councillor Lewis. The report's on the floor for discussion or questions. Your Worship.
Just a question, Madam Chair. Do we know how many, with the total number of housing units we've issued building permits for this year? I've calculated something in the neighborhood of 240 or thereabouts, but I wonder if the director would have that information.
Madam Chair, through you to the mayor, based on Q1 and Q2, we have 204 units.
Okay, and that doesn't take into account then August and September,
That's correct, yeah.
which I think the last information we had from the PDS subcommittee was around 244 or thereabouts. I just wanted to comment, Chair, that shows that although last year was a down year, probably for a variety of reasons, including the higher interest rates, it looks like we're back to some record numbers, and the Parks and Open Spaces Master Plan made reference to 36,200 population for Erie. That's the second time I've seen that, and I think you have as well in the last week and a half or so, which indicates that this community is growing much faster than we had anticipated, much faster than the region has anticipated, and I know that that puts a lot of strain and pressure on our building department, but I have to say that I'm very confident that our staff can manage this. And it doesn't help when we've got a provincial government that makes more work for municipal staff. It just doesn't help. Anyways, that's my comment.
Are there any other comments? Okay, we'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried. Next, the next report is PDS 64 2024, the Town of Fort Erie 2024 Draft Parks and Open Space Master Plan. Can I get a Councillor McDermott? So the report is now on the floor for discussion and comment. Your worship.
Well, nobody else put their hand up, so I'm trying to cover this for myself and some other councillors. Obviously, I'm going to support this because it says we received this. I do have some concerns, and some of my questions I think were directed to what those concerns are, and I'm hoping that when we get some further comments from the public, that may put some of these things into a greater perspective. My concern is that it's very important for us to make sure that we have the parks and amenities that a growing community requires. And this community is growing, and a lot of the growth is in areas where people don't have the amenities in their own backyard. They're either living in townhouses with small backyards, or they're living in single-family dwellings or semi-dwellings with small backyards. So they don't have quite the benefit that previous generations had. So I understand the need to make sure that we've got these parks. And I'm wanting to make sure, though, and we've been making these investments, we've been spending about $3 million a year for the last number of years now on playgrounds of parks of all varieties. Some are active, some are passive, some have playgrounds, some are natural areas. We also have policies that will allow us to bring in parkland through various mechanisms. And that's important, but then if we're going to make them playgrounds or splash pads, I mean, a splash pad is $1 million investment now. And to your point, Madam Chair, about the washrooms, we've now started to build these larger parks to make sure that we've got the washroom facilities because people need them. And so I'm mindful of all of that. We can't lose sight of the fact that we also have an asset management plan with a large infrastructure gap, which we had closed up until just around the time shortly after the pandemic, but now with inflation that occurred, with the ballooning cost of construction, we're now behind the 8 ball. So that we need to make sure that as we're growing, we've got a good eye on what the priorities are. And so the report outlines the strategic objectives that the municipality had set. That's also in the report from the consultants. So we've got that, but we have to make sure that there's a proper balance. We have to make sure that the parks that we have, we can maintain. I think it's very important that we take care of what we already have, and to the extent that we can enhance them, we do that, rather than be spreading these out. This municipality was made up of a number of urban areas, and you know, it may be that we have to take advantage of some of our existing and natural assets, but I'm not sure that we can fulfill all of the recommendations that have been made here. I don't know how fiscally possible that will be. I understand that the report outlines some opportunities for other financing and for some partnerships, and I think that's all very important. If we could do everything that this report from the consultant is suggesting we can do, I'd be all in favor of that if I thought we could do it without ignoring some of our other responsibilities. I just think that we need to make sure that as we move forward, we ensure that our priorities are clear, that our financial viability is clear, and that our ability to sustain whatever it is we do is clear. And having said all of that, I'm not going to say anything further. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Your Worship. Are there any other comments? If not, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried. That brings us to information report, PDS 65-2024, the Provincial Planning Statement 2024 update. You moved, Councillor Lewis? Okay. And are there any comments? I'll call the question. All in favor? Carried. Our final report this evening is PDS 66-2024, 613 Helena Street, draft plan of subdivision, change to conditions of draft plan approval. Can I get a motion to put it on the floor? Councillor Lewis, are there any comments, questions? Councillor Flagg?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just wondering, I notice in this item 19 indicates somewhat of a sunset clause, I guess, at 3 years of approval date, no extensions granted. I'm just wondering whether we would be wise as council to put some type of another sunset clause in that once the application has been granted, that they have a 2-year window to file a site plan or something like that, and I'll allow staff to kind of put the correct wording in, but I think that my desires are fairly clear in that.
Do we require a motion or?
Well, we would, but we should, I think
we
you're
should
looking
ask.
for some
Yes.
comment from staff.
Madam Chair, through you to the councillor, this subdivision would not be subject to site plan control. The province has granted 3 years. And if the applicant is unable to fulfill their responsibility or their construction within 3 years and they come in for draft plan extension, that is a time council can choose to deny that extension to them. But as of now, they are not subject to site plan control, so we cannot put a sunset clause.
Thank you. Are there any other comments then? Okay, I'll call the question. All those in favor? Carried. That ends the reports for this evening. We now come to new business inquiries. Are there any new business inquiries? There being none, we move to the business status report. Are there any questions or comments on the business status report? There being none, I hereby declare the PDS subcommittee meeting adjourned and return the chair to you, Your Worship.
Well done, Councillor Christensen. Lots of reports and lots of challenges, but you did an excellent job. Okay, that takes us to infrastructure services. That'd be Councillor Lewis.
Thank you, Your Worship, and we have a busy night in infrastructure services. I do call that part of the meeting to order. There are no presentations or delegations. There are no reports. Are there any members of new business or inquiries from council? Seeing none, the business status report. Any questions to that? Seeing none, I turn the chair back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. See, Councillor Christensen, that's how it's done. That takes us to corporate community services, Councillor Flagg.
I'm concerned I will not be as efficient as Councillor Lewis. Corporate and community services now in session. We do have a presentation this evening, Mr. David McPherson. Good evening, Mr. McPherson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I was sitting back there experiencing what I would call normal levels of anxiety until the mayor's comment on the quality of the writing from staff members, and I immediately became slightly paranoid about my attempt here to write, and I'm sure it won't be as good as staff, and maybe we can get the criticism out of the way now, Your Worship. So,
we're not paying you, so it doesn't matter.
You know, I'm just a retired guy trying to do my thing, right? So I want to speak tonight on the short-term rental licensing bylaw updates that we saw at the end of last week, and specifically about two issues of concern. The short-term rental license limit and zoning regulations, the application process. By way of background, now let's see, somebody's going to have to help me because I'm not sure where I'm going to go with this. In terms of next slide, oh, there we go. So just by way of background and context, I've spoken to council previously on other issues related to short-term rentals. I'm not going into that tonight. In addition, I have served on two focus groups organized by the town which discussed and commented upon potential ways forward. I've spoken publicly elsewhere on the broader issue and organized or assisted in the organization of taxpayer groups which were opposed to the proliferation of short-term rental units. You probably all knew that. I arranged for the only known credible subject matter expert on this topic, Dr. David Walksmouth, to speak to council on the impact of short-term rentals on the supply of affordable housing. Dr. Walksmouth was not compensated by our group nor for his participation, nor was any of his presentation or comments directed by us or edited by us. His presentation at that time was entirely consistent with all of his writings, both present and in the past. I speak today in favor of the retention of the current limit of 250 short-term rental licenses and against any increase in that limit or the elimination of that limit. There is no economic data that supports the notion that short-term rentals are materially good for the local economy. They just don't exist. The the majority of Fort Erie units are owned by individuals or companies that are not residents of Fort Erie. Dr. Wattsmuth has published and presented to Council at the May 29, 2023 Council meeting, and some important points away from that were dedicated short-term rental units negatively affect the supply of affordable housing. And so as I listened tonight to the various presentations, and you're approving apartments and subdivisions, and you've got 250 units on the go, if you bump the limit to 250, from 250 to whatever number, you're actually fighting against those approvals, in my mind. And in his presentation to you, he commented on the British Columbia experience of a 19.8% increase in rents over a 2-year period, and that was prior to COVID and prior to the inflationary pressures we've seen over the last 2 or 3 years. And finally, house values increased, putting the purchase of affordable housing beyond the reach of buyers. So this is kind of interesting. This is from AirDNA, which is kind of recognized as the data source for Airbnb statistics. And this is specific to Fort Erie. I found it interesting that while there are 250 licenses, there's 404 STR listings. And that's kind of not surprising. Some would say that's even a little light. And maybe some people would say, well, let's just license and be done with them. But do you really want to legitimize bad actors or legitimize the impact on affordable housing? Just a question to think about. And finally, on the limits, on my street, and this is admittedly a small sample, 4 of the 5 short-term rental units sit empty and have since August. This denies affordable housing to those that need it and negatively impacts the sense of community. Vacant housing doesn't make sense, at least to me. Turning to zoning regulations, I support the use of zoning bylaw amendment application as a means to consider exceptions to short-term rental zoning regulations. In my mind, it just makes sense. Why pass zoning regulations only to streamline and ease the way around them? Without repeating myself, the previous concerns on the impact on affordable housing and the sense of community apply to this issue as well. And there is no economic argument that supports an easy workaround. And finally, your resident taxpayers deserve and want a voice on any and all requests to install a ghost hotel next door to them or on their street. And in closing, why now? The zoning bylaw passed earlier this year was appealed to the Ontario Land Tribunal.
Point of order, I believe we should not be speaking about a matter that involves legal. Mr. Chair. My slide's referencing a legal appeal in front of the courts.
Yeah, Councillor, I'll concur with that. I'll ask that you not speak to anything that's before the court.
Okay. Then that concludes my remarks.
Thank you very much. Any questions? Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. McPherson, for the presentation tonight. I just want to ask, the presentation mentions that you're speaking on behalf of yourself, but you also mentioned reference to a group. Are you here tonight representing yourself or the group?
Both.
Thank you. And the other question I had was, on one of the slides, it mentions that there's no economic data to support the notion that short-term rentals materially are good for the local economy. Since I've been councillor, I don't believe you or the group you've referenced has attended a BIA meeting or spoken with any of the local business owners. Am I correct or incorrect?
We wouldn't be members of the BIA, so wouldn't be in attendance at those meetings.
Okay, all are welcome at those meetings, and I would encourage you to attend. One other couple of questions that I have. The slide where you mentioned the It's next to your property, and you mentioned that it is denies affordability housing. Your phase one, where you live in the Mars Home subdivision, was marketed as an exclusive beachside neighborhood. Are you saying that this should be an affordable housing neighborhood?
Well, through you, Mr. Chair, to Councillor Lewis, there are a number of properties on Ryan Avenue that are currently rented. As a matter of fact, a new tenant who just signed a 2-year lease moved in at the end of last week. So the market would seem to indicate that the need is there and that the market is there and it's being filled.
And if I may continue, but you did move into an area that you knew was not an affordable housing neighborhood. It was an exclusive beachside marketed neighborhood, correct?
Through you, Mr. Chair, I wouldn't agree with that characterization, no.
Okay, well, that's what the marketing said on that phase one.
But if I may, Mr. Chair, that speaks to how they marketed it, not the motivation I had to move there.
Fair enough. And Crystal Beach has, in particular, a history of seasonal rental cottages, which often sit empty for a period of time and have historically for over a century. Your presentation mentions that cottages or houses that sit empty contribute negatively to the sense of community. And I'm just interested to know that you are a newer resident to the area. Are you aware that the vacant properties, i.e. cottages, have contributed to the sense of community in Crystal Beach, or do you believe it's actually been the opposite?
Through you. Let me address it this way. I think that there is a very large area that's been dedicated to short-term rentals that would, and if you use Ridgeway Road as a line of demarcation, so if you're on the east side of Ridgeway Road, I think you run the risk of taking affordable housing. I think in that whole area, which is zoned in Crystal Beach, there may be something like 1,500 housing units in there. I sat down one day and tried to count them all. So that's a fairly significant opportunity that could be removed. So while there are certainly some traditional wood frame cottages built on slab that are there that have no insulation, no heating, but that area is going through some changes. You're seeing new buildings put up, you're seeing, so you're seeing some level of investment there. But on the east side of Ridgeway Road, that tends to be much less in terms of short-term rentals, although that area is now open up to being licensed.
I appreciate the comments. And then moving on, when you moved to Crystal Beach, and this was a question actually that you and I never got to get to in our rather hostile meeting before the election, when you moved to Crystal Beach and you did some research on the local area, knowing that it was a beach town with predominantly summer tourism, did you take into account that there were no hotels or motels? And ever wonder, where do the people stay?
Through you. I guess the short answer is no. I mean, we saw a development that appealed to us. We saw availability. We had purchase agreements that distinctly prohibited the use for short-term rentals and accepted that as a suitable safety net.
Thank you. And if I may continue, just one last question, and that should have been something caught on close by your solicitor, in my opinion. You also put up a slide that speaks to Air DNA, and you mentioned that there are 404 short-term rental listings in Fort Erie.
Yeah.
I just wanted to bring to your attention that if you scroll down further on that page, you would notice that that is active and inactive listings. So there is not 404 short-term rental listings in Fort Erie, and I believe some of that data does also contain a portion of Port Colborne.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Fair comment. But I would say that short-term rental listings, specifically for those old-style cottage units, would not be active at all times, just simply because they can't be rented.
I appreciate your presentation, and thank you for the questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. Other questions? Thank you, Mr. McPherson. Appreciate that.
Thank you.
Will bring us to reports. 10.2.1 CAO 12/2024 on the floor. Thank you, Your Worship. Questions or comments? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. 10.2.2 CAO 13/2024. Thank you, Your Worship, again. Questions, input, Your Worship?
Yeah, I just want to say that this is an excellent report, and we receive these annually, and they really encapsulate the work that's being done by the people on our committee, many of whom have accessibility issues, so they're very attuned to the need to address a lot of these issues. They go out and speak to businesses. I know that even Councillor McDermott went out and had dialogue with the Royal Bank down on Jarvis Street, and these really do help to make our community more welcoming for all of our residents. And so I want to commend the committee and thank them for the work that they do, and thank Ms. Bradnam for putting together this report.
Thanks for those comments. Any others? Yes, Councillor Christensen.
Through you, Chair, I want to add that the Accessibility Advisory Committee lent its support and knowledge to questions raised by the Seniors Services Advisory Committee last year with respect to usage of a particular facility, and we, with their support and help and active help by Ms. Bradnam, we were able to facilitate direct accessibility for heavy wheelchairs into the restaurant. So I have to second what the mayor has said.
Excellent, thank you. Anything else? Seeing none, all those in favor? Carried. I'll bring us to 10.2.3 CS 07/2024. Looking for a motion. Councillor Christensen, thank you. It's on the floor. Input? Questions? Yep. Councillor McDermott.
Mr. Chair. I'd like to move an amendment to the 2025 budget timetable as per Appendix 1 of CS 07/2024 to change the date of Council and Budget Committee meeting, number 1, capital budget forecast meeting from Wednesday, November 20th, 2024 to Monday, November 25th, 2024.
Thank you, Councillor McDermott. That amendment is on the floor for discussion. All good? All right, all those in favor of the amendment? Thank you, that passes. Move us back to the main motion as amended. Your Worship.
Yeah, I just want to make sure that staff is given credit for the work that they've done trying to put us in a place where we can at least address some of the pressures that have been identified in this report in terms of trying to establish a 2025 budget, and also keeping an eye on some of the responsibilities that we have identified in terms of asset management in particular, and the strategic objectives that we have outlined in our strategic plan. It's not an easy task, and I know the residents are all going through some difficult times. The municipality also has operations which are affected by inflation. They're affected by the escalation of construction costs, which are identified here in the report. So this is just kind of an overview at the outset. This is the beginning of the process. We haven't even really gotten into any of the meetings, and so the staff will continue to look for ways that they can ensure that the financial situation of the municipality is stable, that the needs of the residents are met, and that we can do that in a fiscally responsible fashion. And I know that this council is mindful of the concerns that the residents have, and I know that we'll work our way through this. But this is the beginning of the process, and we're going to work diligently. I want to assure the public we're going to work diligently to make sure that this is a good budget which will result in a sustainable operation municipally, but something that's affordable for our residents.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Jansen, do you have anything to add?
Sure, thanks, Chair. The budget process is something that happens over the span of a few months, but certainly I would just want to underscore the effort that town staff takes throughout the year to be maximizing particularly non-tax revenues, but also minimizing expenses with healthy procurement, with monitoring the variances that council receives and so on throughout the year. So while we are setting our rates and our point in time goals for budget, we are actively working with that throughout the year. As the mayor mentioned, there's a number of pressures, not only on the mix of inflationary pressures we see on expenditure side, but particularly this year, as the report notes, on the revenue side as well. We're fortunate to have larger reserve balances than some, but with that, in the interest rate environment we're in, comes a hit to our levy as well, with a decrease in some of that revenue. So another important part in our budget cycle is the fees, and the separate report we bring with that in December as well. So again, that's an effort to ensure that those that use our services, that where it is fee-based, that those are in line with where we'd expect them and helping to offset otherwise taxes. As we all know, there's challenges as well for our budget and with the way we present it for incorporating regional costs as well, both with the water and wastewater, where that's an over 60% portion of that budget, but then also with our levy as well, as we bill for the region as well, with the single tax bill that we give residents. So a number of challenges there, not only just with the levy itself, but even the extent to which our transit costs are increasing this year. So we will do our best. We meet many times throughout the next couple of months to refine and to rethink and to incorporate council's strategic direction, and as well as emerging needs. Growth certainly is something we're always trying to capture and make sure that that we're reflecting that and using that to help minimize increases as well. But we look forward to working with council. Certainly, we have some efforts throughout the year or throughout the budget process where we're posting reports, presentations, some supplementary packages and so on online, but if there's ever any questions, we do provide on the budget website a number of contacts. Please do feel free for anyone listening or anyone in attendance to submit emails or contact myself or my staff to learn more.
Thank you, Mr. Jansen. Thank you and the rest of the directors for the efforts that you put in. Mr. McQueen, anything to add to that?
Thank you. I think the only thing that I would add to that is the area chief administrative officers and the regional chief administrative officer meet fairly regularly. In our most recent meeting, the topic obviously was budget pressure, because we all do face similar local budget pressures, and we've had some good dialogue with the regional CAO, as the regional portion of the bill represents a significant portion of the tax bills that Town of Fort Erie residents receive. And we have been encouraging and advocating for the regional CAO to take a similar look, level of diligence, and at the affordability of the tax bill at the regional level as well, to assist us. And we're hopefully we'll continue to see that same level of diligence with the regional budget to help offset some of the pressure that we're all facing.
Thank you, Mr. McQueen. We all have our challenges coming up. It'll be an interesting next few months. Anyone else? Okay, so all those in favor of the main motion as amended? Carried. That'll bring us to 10.2.4 LLS 04 2024. Looking for a mover. Thank you, Councillor McDermott. Questions, comments? No? Councillor Lewis?
Mr. Mr. Chair. I just want to take a few moments to thank staff for the report and the options that have been presented to council. I know an incredible amount of work has been done on this topic, and maybe not everyone is happy, but I don't know if there was ever an outcome on the short-term rental file where we were ever going to see complete buy-in from the community and acceptance by all. A tremendous amount of work has been done by this council on the noise and nuisance bylaw reform, which I think speaks to the heart of the problems and should be a tool that is used to go after bad operators, with the footnote that not every short-term rental is a bad operator, and certainly have empathy for those who have had to spend a considerable amount of time while we went through this process to deal with bad operators. As well as the time that council spent on the land use planning and official plan amendments and the amount of consultation with the community. I don't know if Fort Erie has ever consulted with the community at length or over such a long period of time in order to get to where we are. I do believe we have made a decision, and I'm quite happy with the outcome and find it to be as balanced as we probably could be. But I would like to move an amendment or a motion that council proceed with option 1, the removal of the limit, and let the marketplace prevail. I know that wasn't necessarily the recommendation in the staff report, but I think we went through the, like I said before, the noise and nuisance bylaw reform. We went through land use planning conversations as well as official plan amendments and the process and cost that incurred. And I, applaud the previous council for taking the brief pause that they did in putting the cap in place, because at that time we were dealing with kind of an unknown. And I look at this as no different than when I was living in Peel Region. The Uber taxi cab industry coming in and quite upsetting the taxi cab industry that had a history in the community, but they moved forward, they created a policy, and life went on. So I would like to move that we go with option 1 in the staff report.
I'm just trying to determine, is Mr. Todd, is that going to be a...
That's on page 5 of the report, alternatives.
alternative? So is that going to be an amendment? Yes?
Through you, Chair, yes. So to be an amendment, and I think at least I think I've captured it in the minutes. The only thing I would ask is that we'll include that the draft appendix be updated accordingly to reflect that change. And so I don't think we need to go through that and how it's going to work tonight. You can leave that with staff, and then we'll prepare that for when the amendment comes back to council for final approval.
Okay, I appreciate that. So I will need a seconder on the amendment. Council?
Committee.
Committee? Okay, thank you. So discussion on the amendment then. Your Worship.
So we have 250 licenses issued right now. We have 84 applicants on the wait list. That may not be an accurate reflection of the number of people that might want to have short-term rental licenses. But of that 84, 56 are not within the zone that's been identified, which means there's 28, which means that if they were given licenses, that gets us to 278. And who knows? I'm not prepared to have no cap whatsoever. And the reasons I'm not really go to the heart of this. Councillor Lewis indicated that, and quite correctly, there's no, other than the small hotel that Phil Smith has put up, Hotel Philco, there's no place for people who want to stay in that area or stay in other locations in Fort Erie other than a couple of small facilities, particularly since the Holiday Inn is closed. So that would be a reason why I would support short-term rentals. The reasons why I wouldn't support short-term rentals outweigh that, and they really boil down to the fact that they do take houses out of the market for people to live in on a full-time basis. You can't get around that. And whether they're houses that people occupy themselves for part of the year and then lease out, that's fine. I get that. They may be part of the 250 or 300 or whatever it might be. But there will be some of those houses that aren't in the market at all and aren't necessarily being used very much at all. And that does have an impact on the sense of community that Mr. McPherson referred to. So they take houses out of the housing supply either for rental or for people to buy. That has an impact on the market for both price of ownership houses and rentals. And the other point is there may be some benefit during the period of time when those units are occupied. There may be some benefit to the local merchants who are selling goods or who are restaurant owners who are selling other services within the community. But that would surely be offset and more, I believe, by people that would be occupying or families that would be occupying a home throughout the year, because they're buying groceries, they're buying gas, they're participating in activities in the community, they're actually helping to create a sense of community. So that those are the reasons why I won't support this. It's a commercial activity in a zone that we've now identified as residential. I get that. But I'm not prepared to sacrifice housing units, rental units, for the sake of additional rental units. Maybe there might be a number that I'd be agreeable to, 300, 350, that might make sense to me. But opening it up and having no limit whatsoever, I can't support. And when we deal with this, Mr. Clerk, I'd like to have a recorded vote on the amendment.
Any other comments? Councillor Lewis?
Thank you, and thank you, Your Worship, for also calling for the recorded vote, because that was my next move after this. Just a couple of comments, and that is, even the number of 250 put in place by the previous council was an arbitrary number that was pulled out of the sky, that was based on no scientific data or anything, really. It was just a number that was arrived at. I will support this because maybe that's where we should have started in the first place, by just capping this. But since we went through the process of years, and I say the longest probably consultation with the community, hundreds of thousands of dollars to go through a land use and OP process to determine where we wanted them and where we didn't want them. And I also beg to differ on, those that occupy a short-term rental in a tourism town, and I include all of Fort Erie in that, with very little hotels or motels, do buy gas, food, and support the local economy. Who I often don't see is some residents that say the contrary. So I guess this is one where we will certainly have to agree to disagree. A council will ultimately determine where we go, but for those reasons, that is why I bring forward the amendment.
Thank you, Councillor Lewis. Anyone else? Councillor McDermott?
I'm going to support the motion. I wasn't expecting it tonight, but, this business, we're taking away homes by leaving them empty. I find that really odd, because if I own a home, and I think it's kind of my prerogative what I do with my home. If I leave it empty because for maybe 6 months I go somewhere else, I leave it empty. It's my house. I could do with what I want with it. I mean, these homes, I suppose, in a perfect world could be affordable housing, but it's not. So what we're saying is basically if you, just use Ryan Avenue as a place. There's a couple of places open. If you're not too fussy on short-term rentals, I think you would be happy that they wouldn't be there for a couple of months. So I don't buy the fact that we're taking away housing from people. All these houses that are built are owned by somebody. And it's their prerogative what they do with their homes, whether they want it to try and be a short-term rental, or just be a happy house, or just live there whenever whenever you're there. So I wouldn't want somebody dictating to me about my empty house, because that empty house has a taxpayer in it that's paying taxes on that house every year. So, you know, that argument to me is, just doesn't make sense to me at all. So, you know, I think that we've done everything we can to make short-term rentals a happy place for people that want to come to Fort Erie, and I think we've done that. We had, the first couple of years, we had a lot of noise and nuisance calls, and today they're not all, I think we had 17 over this past year, which is incredibly good, considering all the nonsense we were having previous to that. So I'm going to support Councillor Lewis's motion, even though it is a surprise to me, because I think we have to kind of end this somewhere down the line. And I think this would be the perfect place so we can concentrate on something else. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I guess nothing else, Clerk?
Chair, I'll just remind council, recorded votes are not permitted at council and committee.
Well, you didn't remind me. You educated me, and I appreciate that very much. All right, so all those in favor of the amendment, then, is what we're voting on first. All those in favor of the amendment? That carries. Move us back to the main motion.
Just as a matter of process, you should say opposed.
Fair enough. All those opposed? It will still carry. Bring us back to the main motion then. Any further comments? And all those in favor of the main motion as amended? Opposed? And that carries as well. That'll take us to new business inquiries. Seeing none, questions on the business status report? And I'll turn the chair back to you, Your Worship.
Thank you very much, Councillor Flagg. So we've got some items under closed session. Can I have a motion to go into closed session, Councillor Christensen? Any questions or comments about that? All those in favor of going into closed session? Opposed? That is carried. Okay, we're back in the council chamber, and Councillor Lewis, you have the resolution for us to rise and reconvene into open session.
Thank you, Your Worship. Council does now rise and reconvene from closed session at 8:51 p.m. with report 11.1 that council approves the closed meeting minutes of July 22nd, 2024 and September 23rd, 2024. And 11.2 that council defer the items 11.2 to the October 7th, 2024 council and committee meeting. And 11.3 that council authorize the cost payment for subdivision agreement with Centennial Homes Niagara Inc. for the South Ridge Meadows Plan of Subdivision Plan 59M-521 be increased from $292,450 to $1,010,480, and further that council amends the 2024 capital budget to decrease the South Ridge Meadows Subdivision Wells Ave Capital Project SRM W24 by $121,760 with a funding increase of $2,915 from the Storm Development DC Reserve and funding decreases of $18,900 from the Road Refurbishing Reserve of $105,775 for the Storm Refurbishing Reserve, and further that council amends the 2024 capital budget to increase the South Ridge Meadows Subdivision Parker Ave Capital Project SRM P24 by $121,415 with funding of $18,750 from the Road DC Reserve and $102,665 from the Storm DC Reserve. Wow.
Thank you. Any questions or comments? All those in favor? That is carried. That takes us then to scheduling of meetings. Councillor Christensen, I neglected to mention about the Ridgeway Fest, so maybe you could comment on that?
Yes, Your Worship. The Ridgeway BIA is once again having a Harvest Fest. It will be held the Thanksgiving weekend on the Saturday, and it will be from 8 in the morning till about 3 or 4 in the afternoon. There will be, in addition to the last farmers market, so anyone who enjoys the wine and pastries and vegetables, it will be our last farmers market of the year, but there will be events for children. There'll be face painting. The ice cream alley is opening up for the day, so those who love ice cream alley will be able to actually enjoy it. And of course, you can always enjoy our shops. So if you have finished the 5K run and you're hungry, or you want to just relax, then come to Ridgeway and just enjoy a bit more fun. The other meeting that I need to announce is I believe it's the 15th, Tuesday the 15th of October. The Fort Erie Library Board meets at the Centennial Branch at 4:30. That's it.
Thank you. Any other meetings? Councillor Lewis.
One meeting, which is the Crystal Beach Business Improvement Association, which is always open to the public at 6 p.m. every second Wednesday, which will be the 9th at the Crystal Ridge Library.
And Councillor Flagg, did you have your hand up?
I did. Just we have rescheduled the corporate and community services. It is now Wednesday, the 30th at 3 o'clock to avoid trick-or-treating on the 31st, which some of our members would want to go.
This way you'll be able to get out there.
Yep, no question. Dressed like a counselor.
Yeah. Okay, fair enough. If there are no other meetings, then I'm going to ask Councillor Dubanow. Oh, I guess we have to stay. He's not here. Councillor McDermott, would you like to move that we adjourn and reconvene at the regular council meeting on October the 24th? Okay, that's on the floor. All those in favor? Carried.